Just a heads up, today's episode does deal with distressing themes, including suicide. If you or someone you know is in need of help, you can call Lifeline on 13 11 14.
Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Emma Gillespie.
I'm Billi FitzSimons.
Australia's medicines regulator has issued a safety alert for Ozempic and similar drugs over a potential risk of suicidal thoughts. The updated warning follows a spike in reports of suicidal ideation linked to weight loss medications to the Therapeutic Goods Administration, the TGA. Today, we are going to explore what led to this moment and what it means for patients and everything else that you need to know in between.
When this came out on Monday, I believe it was.
Yeah.
It was so interesting, and I immediately thought of you because you have spent most of this year looking into weight loss medication, looking into Ozempic. I'm sure many of the people listening to this episode have probably listened to your investigation into Ozempic.
Yeah.
If you haven't, we will link it in the show notes. But before we get into what the announcement on Monday from the TGA was, do you want to just kind of give us the lay of the land about what, I know I'm referencing just Ozempic, but I know it's much broader than that, how long it's been around, all of those kind of details.
Yeah, of course. So Ozempic, as you mentioned, is the big one. It was first approved by health authorities here in Australia as a medication to treat type 2 diabetes in 2018. Now, Ozempic is a brand name for a drug otherwise known as semaglutide, and that falls into this family of drugs called GLP-1s. So you'll often hear these drugs described as GLP-1s or as Ozempic as kind of a catch-all phrase, but they are taken as an injection, usually once a week, and they start working almost immediately, within hours in some cases. Ozempic is the name that gets talked about so much in the media, but there are now some very popular alternatives, Wegovy, Mounjaro, Saxenda that you might have heard of, and they all work in the same way. So GLP-1s act on hormones in our body, and for patients with diabetes, they make sure that their cells work better with insulin, but also, and importantly, these drugs slow down what's called gastric emptying. So in other words, you feel fuller faster. That is the side effect that has meant these drugs have become increasingly popular for weight loss. And, you know, we've seen this kind of global surge. They've become viral, the kind of butt of celebrity jokes almost. And that's pretty much the lay of the land in as short of a summary as I can give you on the world of GLP-1s.
I'm interested in how popular they have become because I think, you know, if we go back 3 years when I feel like we were all kind of first hearing about it, maybe not even 3 years ago, maybe 2 years ago, it felt like something that, I didn't know anyone who was on it. And now, just anecdotally, I think that I hear of a lot more people who don't have type 2 diabetes who are on it. It does feel a lot more common. Do we know exactly how popular they are?
Yeah, they have really shifted into the mainstream. I think 4 or 5 years ago, we heard about Ozempic as this kind of celebrity joke, or you'd hear about celebrities being quote unquote on it, but it wasn't really in our backyard or in our faces and in our world. But that has shifted in recent years. So Ozempic is a PBS listed drug for type 2 diabetes treatment, meaning if that's why you take it, it's subsidized by the government, costs about $40 a month, and PBS scripts are tracked. But GLP-1 prescriptions for any use other than type 2 diabetes treatment aren't tracked. So if you are taking GLP-1s for weight loss, you don't have diabetes, that's a private prescription. We have no way of knowing how many people are doing that. It's virtually impossible to determine the scale of GLP-1 use. It also means that most people who use them are spending up to $400 a month to access them because they're not subsidized. Now, globally, we know there has been a surging demand for these drugs. It's created shortages, supply chain issues, and that demand has also made pharmaceutical companies very rich. Just a few weeks ago, Eli Lilly, that is the manufacturer of Mounjaro, became the first drug maker to reach a valuation of $1 trillion. It's about 1.5 trillion Aussie dollars.
Yeah, I saw that. And I think it does speak to just how popular this is becoming for private use. I want to talk a bit more about side effects because that is what the TGA talked about in their announcement on Monday.
Yeah.
Before we get to that specific announcement though, what are the common side effects that we know other than weight loss?
Yeah, so while we don't know how many prescriptions of GLP-1s are issued in Australia, we do know the kinds of negative side effects that are being reported. And that's because GPs and healthcare providers can report adverse side effects relating to GLP-1s to the TGA. So there's this adverse event notifications database that those reports are listed on that anyone can publicly see. Now, between July 2023 and July 2025, the database shows that gastrointestinal disorders were the most frequently reported side effects associated with semaglutides. So that includes nausea, vomiting, cramping, constipation, pancreatitis. Those complaints make up around half of all negative side effects on the database relating to these drugs. But another really concerning one that has emerged is suicidal ideation. So that makes up 1 in every 20 adverse GLP-1 reactions reported to this database. In the 2 years to July 2025, there were 7 deaths linked to psychiatric disorders and GLP-1s. Ozempic was the only product suspected to be related to 2 deaths linked to suicide in that period. But the TGA does note that it uses these reports to identify when a safety issue may be present. So it says by assessing the safety of a medicine, quote, cannot be made using the tracker alone.
Got it. And I remember from your investigation into Ozempic that you actually spoke to someone who had experienced suicidal ideation whilst on Ozempic. What can you tell us about that conversation?
Yeah, I interviewed Mackenzie earlier this year. She is a 26-year-old who sought out Ozempic for weight management through Juniper. Now, Juniper is one of a growing number of online platforms that prescribe weight loss medications without requiring in-person consults. You've probably seen their ads or heard from them in some way on your social media feed. They are a massive company, and Mackenzie disclosed to them that she had been taking antidepressants since her early teens. So she had a history of depression, but she was approved to use Ozempic by Juniper. Here is a little bit about her story.
So I guess for me, I kind of had peace of mind that it would cover everything that was in my medical history. So I started receiving that in the mail and injecting that as per kind of the recommended guidelines. I, for no reason whatsoever, and I hadn't felt like this for a very long time, became suicidal, unable to work. It was really quite unexplained. I was really, really concerned, and I chatted with my partner about it, and he was like, well, the only thing that has changed in your life is you going on this particular medication.
So Mackenzie has a long-term history of depression, which was being managed by her antidepressants, but then she started on Ozempic and then began experiencing suicidal ideations, essentially out of nowhere?
Yeah, exactly. And so she expressed her concerns to her regular GP, so not who she was prescribed the GLP-1 through. And he told her that he'd actually seen this in a number of patients. His explanation was that GLP-1s slow the digestive system, and as a result, they can have a negative effect on the absorption of other drugs. So if you're taking other medications whilst you're injecting Ozempic, maybe it will influence how your body absorbs those other meds.
So Ozempic potentially stopped her body from absorbing the antidepressants that she had been on for the past decade.
Hi, I'm Zara. I'm the co-founder of the Daily Aus, and we started this company because we think news can be done differently. If you agree, you can hit subscribe. It's the best way to help us grow. Now, back to the video.
Yeah, that is basically what her doctor explained. And so Mackenzie ended up being in such a bad place, her GP suggested she go to the hospital, stop taking Ozempic immediately. I did ask her about the kind of information that she was given by Juniper at the time. She said she thoroughly interrogated all of it, and the resources at that time did not explain anything or flag anything to do with mental health. So she never held that as a concern when she started taking Ozempic.
And did Mackenzie speak to Juniper, the prescriber, about the suicidal ideation?
So she did tell the provider that her doctor had advised her to stop taking Ozempic. She explained the side effects, that she had been hospitalized, and the response that she told me she got was basically, well, that's not a listed side effect. It shouldn't affect your antidepressant absorption at all. TDA put these concerns to Juniper earlier this year, and they told us that the platform disputes any relationship between these medications and an increased risk of mental health related side effects. The clinical director of Juniper, Dr. Matt Vickers, cited specific guidance from the UK health regulator, which stated in September 2024 that the available data does not support a causal association between GLP-1s and suicidal ideation. Vickers also pointed to some data from the US. Mind you, this was a preliminary evaluation of an ongoing study by the Food and Drug Administration, which said last year that it didn't find an association or clearly demonstrated relationship between GLP-1s and the occurrence of suicidal thoughts. However, an analysis of adverse reactions within the World Health Organization's global database painted a different picture. Findings from an international study published in August actually identified a disproportionate link between suicidal ideation and these medications.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that the data at the time basically suggested that there wasn't exactly a link, but the WHO, the World Health Organization, did say that there was a possible link. But then on Monday, the TGA, which is Australia's medical regulator, came out and said that this link between GLP-1s, which is Ozempic, and suicidal ideation is a bit more clear now.
Yeah, there has been, I suppose, a lot of contradictory information. If you wanted to argue either way, you could kind of cherry pick some data to reflect that. But what has been in black and white is that database, the adverse event database that the TGA publishes, which shows us an increase and frequency in suicidal ideation being reported. We had that global data from the WHO, and now we have an update from the TGA. So on Monday, it released advice on GLP-1s warning about the potential risk of suicidal thoughts. The regulator said that patients taking these medications should, quote, tell their health professional if they experience new or worsening depression, suicidal thoughts, or any unusual changes in mood or behavior.
So what does this mean in practical terms for anyone who is taking it and is now concerned? Or if you know someone who's taking it and are concerned?
The biggest immediate change is that there's going to be labels now on GLP-1. So all GLP-1 medications will note the risk of suicidal thoughts or behaviors, a warning printed on the pen that you will inject and in the kind of accompanying leaflet. But I also think what is really significant about this announcement is it sends a really important message to patients like Mackenzie, like dozens, if not hundreds of others who have felt ignored, to be honest, or even gaslit by the system, by prescribers who have kind of downplayed their experiences. If you are someone taking GLP-1s and you are worried about this, it is a small percentage. So I would say, there's no need to immediately be alarmed. If you don't have a history of mental ill health, if you aren't taking other medications that you're concerned could mix with a GLP-1, but if you are someone who maybe is more at risk or vulnerable to mental ill health, or if you are feeling a certain way and maybe you have been doubting yourself, I think that this is really affirming to tell patients to, trust themselves. Interestingly, on Monday, the TGA also said that it couldn't rule out whether Mounjaro, one of the popular GLP-1s, reduces the strength of the oral contraceptive pill. We had heard a little bit about this before from previous studies from other health bodies, and now the TGA is advising that patients use non-oral contraception for 4 weeks when starting Mounjaro and 4 weeks after increasing their dosage. So they're basically saying, give yourself a bit of a 4-week window if your intake changes or when you start the drug to ensure that you're protected. So for example, use a condom for 4 weeks.
Interesting. And just quickly before we wrap up, I also saw that there was another big announcement from the WHO this week about GLP-1s. What was that?
Yeah, it's been a big week for GLP-1s, Billi. The WHO has released new guidelines on the use of GLP-1s for the treatment of obesity in adults. Now, this is a global framework that acknowledges a need to treat obesity, quote, as a chronic relapsing disease rather than a lifestyle choice. So just quickly, the WHO said, while medication alone won't solve this global health crisis, GLP-1 therapies can help millions overcome obesity and reduce its associated harms as part of a comprehensive approach that includes healthy diets, regular physical activity, and support from health professionals. Now, it's significant because this is a global health body basically endorsing or recommending GLP-1s as an obesity treatment, and also formally recognizing obesity as a chronic disease associated with high numbers of deaths, a high economic burden on health systems. Now, look, it doesn't solve the issue of suicidal ideation, of long-term side effects and concern around mental health impacts, but if there is a global health body saying we need to take this treatment really seriously, saying that it is critical to solving the obesity crisis, I think that means we will see a lot more investment in understanding these side effects. So with more attention will mean more funding, more research, more transparency, and hopefully that will give patients a clearer sense of side effects and some more answers around the suicidal ideation piece.
I mean, it makes sense that you said before that these medications have really only been around since 2018. So the fact that it is constantly changing and there is still new research still coming out about it, it does make sense given how new it is.
Yeah, exactly. And we will continue to learn more as time passes and, as the global conversation continues.
Thank you for taking us through it, Em, and for all of the work that you've done this year on looking into it. What a timely announcement from the TGA.
Thank you so much, Billi.
And thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Daily Aus. If you've got a personal story about GLP-1s that you want to share with us, we would love to hear from you. You can DM us on Instagram at any time or send an email to hello@thedailyaus.com.au. And just a reminder that if this episode has raised any issues for you, you can contact Lifeline on 13 11 14. We'll be back this afternoon with your evening headlines, but until then, have a great day.